This is Maharajas of Scale, a podcast where we go behind the scenes and talk to founders who are demolishing the myths around building and scaling a big business in India. These are the stories that have shattered the assumptions around Indian consumers and are changing the game completely. I am Krishna Jonakadla, serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Flit, the fashion locator in town, and startup mentor, bringing you these stories. Hey everyone, this is Krishna, your host from Maharajas of Scale. Today we have a young and dynamic entrepreneur, Aman, who's built HiApe, an experience discovery platform. Aman, I have to say, I am a fan of experiences, and what you built with HiApe, or rather building with HiApe, is pretty astounding for a Indian startup. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with this.
Yeah, sure, Krishna. So we have been building, so I'll just go ahead and tell a little about myself before I start describing what we are doing with HiApe. So basically, I'm a technology person. So currently, I'm the co-founder and CTO of HiApe. And I have been fascinated with technology, since my childhood. I believe, that fascination really started when I was back in my school during my class 7th or 8th. And I got introduced to my first language, which was QBasic back then. And under the guidance of my teachers, I started building a few games on QBasic. So earlier I was addicted to computer games, and my mother was always after me, asking me to stop playing those games. So I said, okay, I'm going to stop playing games, and instead I'm going to start building one now. So I built a few simple games on QBasic, such as tic-tac-toe, Ludo, things like those. And that's how it all got started. I just got hooked on to technology ever since. So when I went to my college, so I was also a very curious person. I wanted to try out different things. And that's why I joined Marine Engineering and Research Institute of India. I made it a point to join Merchant Navy. I wasn't aware of the startup scene back then. So I wanted to do something different, and I thought Merchant Navy would quite be a lot different than what my friends are going to do. So I ventured out into that. And it was during my college that I started. Being the curious person that I was, I wanted to earn money on my own. I wanted to stop taking money from my parents. So I started doing all sorts of freelancing activities since my first year. I was doing SEO, social media marketing, building simple websites, literally anything that I could get my hands on. So I learned a lot during that period. And then during the end of my second year, I opened my first startup, which was called as Bombheads. So Bombheads was a customized t-shirt delivery company. We used to deliver customized t-shirts to different college festivals out there. And we worked with many different colleges, such as IIT Tumkur, HPTI Kanpur, University of Hyderabad, Manipal Institute of Technology, my own college for that matter. So we worked with a lot of them. We delivered close to about 3,000, 4,000 t-shirts in just a span of 4 months while we were active in the company. But it was a very operation-intensive business, and it was really getting difficult for us to continue doing that along with our college studies. So we had to call that off, even though it was going really great. And then towards my third year, I opened my another startup, which was called as Rise for India. So Rise for India was citizen-driven, opinion-based media website, as we called it. So what that means is that we had a team of about 150 volunteer writers all across the country. And they used to voice their opinion about anything wrong that was going on around their locality or in their society. They could just come on Rise for India and voice their opinion. And the thing was that all these writers were writing voluntarily without expecting any sort of payment. So we had built a complete volunteer system around the website. And we had about 500,000 readers who used to come and read our articles, and we had NGO partners as well, and our readers could sign up with us to volunteer for those NGO partners in different social activities. So there was a NGO based out of Chennai, and they wanted some volunteers to come and teach the farmers out there. They reached out to us, and we connected them with 3 college students from Chennai who went there and helped in teaching those farmers. So that was the kind of impact that we were creating at Rise for India. Then towards the end of my college, I got in touch with Prasun, who is my co-founder at HiApe. We were childhood friends, and Prasun was just back from Poland, and we started discussing this idea of HiApe. So I was in Kolkata at that time, and Prasun was just back from his Europe tour. He was there in Bangalore, and we started discussing about the scene, the Europe scene that Prasun had seen there. That it was very easy to discover experiences out there, and there were so many interesting things happening that you could just be assured that you would have an awesome night every weekend. And and we were discussing this. So it wasn't like it wasn't happening in Kolkata or Bangalore. I mean, there were a lot of fun things happening out there. But more often than not, we used to end up going to the same place where we went every time. So there's a place called Park Street in Kolkata. And I used to find myself going there every weekend. We used to plan, aaj to we are going to do something crazy tonight. But as it happened, we just couldn't find anything happening. And so we used to end up going to the same bar or restaurant in the Park Street where we used to go every weekend. So we decided that if so many things are happening in India, then why don't we create a platform which would answer the question of people where to go out tonight? I mean, what's the interesting thing that we could do? And so that's where the idea of iApe was born, and we have been building it ever since. So on the Right for India front, after I finished my college, we actually sold it off to an NGO based out of Maharashtra, who was a partner since we started the company.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just give me one quick second, Aman.
Sure.
So that's pretty interesting. You covered a wide arc of things, practically what your last 10-15 year journey in what you just mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So it's since my school days, what I've mentioned, how I became an entrepreneur and why I'm doing what I'm doing today. Yeah.
But let's go back to those school days. For instance,
Sure.
Marine engineering. My God, this is the first time I think marine biologist or marine engineer has been on our platform, and that has actually fascinated me. I think a friend of mine ended up being a marine biologist. She lives, I think, north of Bhopal today.
Okay.
And she practically lives some sort of I wouldn't call it a hermit kind of a life, but if you know the Amish in the US, there is a community called Amish, and the Amish they do not have electricity.
Mm-hmm.
They do not take anything from the local government.
Yes. Okay.
That forces them to participate in that local civilization.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own set of things. They have their own lighting systems.
Mm-hmm.
So she's sort of living a life very similar to that. And she tells us that it is the source of inspiration for that is the marine biology, career that she had. But interesting. So how come marine engineering?
So that's what I said. I mean, I wanted to do something completely different. I mean, when I was in my class 12, I wanted to do something out of the box. I mean, to explore the unexplored. And obviously, the startups weren't still the cool thing at that time that they are today. And not every youngsters was aware of that startup scene. So I would say the most different thing that I could find at that point of time was merchant navy. It was fascinating for me to stay 6 months out there in the sea, away from everyone, and where you could just see water everywhere and not a drop to drink. So it really sounded really fascinating to me, and that's why I went ahead.
Very interesting. How long were you with the merchant navy?
I really never joined a ship. So as I said, as soon as I entered my first year, I opened my first startup in second year. At that point of time, I realized that this is what I want to do. I mean, merchant navy is not going to be a match for me. Startups, I just come to you now. Yeah.
Interesting. And the second startup about t-shirts, looks like you achieved a fair degree of scale with that one. I wouldn't say a lot of scale, but some scale, right?
Yeah, there was some scale with that. So it was a very operation intensive business. In fact, we actually partnered up with a lot of printing people in Howrah. And in Ludhiana. So when we got a bulk order of about 1,000 t-shirts at once, we actually got in partnership with suppliers out of Ludhiana as well, and we were working with them. So we used to get orders, and we used to go to our suppliers in Howrah and Ludhiana, and we would then give them the orders, get the t-shirt printed in the specifications that we want. We were very particular about the quality of t-shirts, so we weren't giving out like 100 or 120 GSM t-shirts like most of the customized t-shirt companies give out. So we were also very particular about quality. So if we would have continued, I'm sure that would have scaled to an even higher number. But obviously it wasn't really possible for us to continue doing that.
Okay. And Rise for India, what was the inspiration behind that?
So Rise for India, I mean, as the name says, I mean, we expected the citizens to rise for their country. I mean, to stand up and voice their opinion. So as I mentioned, I mean, I was a lot into freelancing activities, right? And some of the activities that I was doing was writing content. So I was a writer myself at that time, and since my college days, I have liked to participate a lot in writing and debating, those sort of stuff. So I really liked writing on my own. I mean, publishing on my own blog as well. I mean, I had a blogspot.com address, so I used to publish a few articles from my site. So I wanted to create a platform where people could come and voice their opinion and also get readership for their articles. See, the biggest thing with writing a blogspot article or a Medium article is that you have to get out and make your voice heard yourself, right? I mean, you have to make sure that people are reading your article, people are hearing your opinion about a particular issue. And the other thing is that you need to go to Times of India to publish your articles, or Hindustan Times for that matter, but that's really a lengthy process. I mean, until a journalist is really interested in your story, he or she is not going to cover it. So I wanted to create a platform where people who are into writing, who want to voice their opinion, who want to tell something to the society, they would just come there and do that. So that was the inspiration behind Rise for It.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And eventually, was there ever a grandiose design to bring about social change? Because we see this, right? Today, social media is abuzz with, I call them armchair activists. It's easy for us to, yes, at some point in time, a lot of elections and a lot of events recently, for example, the Delhi riots, for instance, there are two sides, people who are not present at the scene, people who are not aware of the local scenarios. And given the fact that journalists themselves are starting to take sides, right, and misinterpret, and then it may be an American trend. Because I've spent time there, I've spent time here. Politics in America has become so polarized, and that sort of has had a spillover effect onto Indian media as well. Because a lot of Indian so-called think tanks are all funded by these Western companies, right? So it's easy to think that they're not making an impact. I think they are. But was there a grandiose design to actually affect social outcomes at some point in time with Rise for India?
Yes, so obviously, I mean, see, Krishna, I mean, what I wanted to do, it's easy to just sit back at your home and write articles and voice your opinion is what I thought. I mean, so obviously the objective of creating a platform was to give people that power, but at the same time, I wanted some kind of on-ground impact as well for Rise for India to create. And that is the reason I mentioned that we even partnered up with our NGOs. So our readers, I mean, the kind of readers we had on the platform, about those 400,000, 500,000 readers, they were also kind of social activists themselves. And we used to get so many messages from people on Facebook, on email, asking us about how they can create an impact in the society, even if they are not writing on the platform. Let's say everybody doesn't have a gift to write, right? Everybody can't be a speaker out there, but still everyone can make a change in the society. So that's the question that people were asking us as well. And that's when we started working with NGOs. As I mentioned about the Chennai example. Now, there was an NGO based out of Mumbai. So this NGO used to work with orphanages, and they wanted someone who could come and teach orphan children. So again, we got in touch with, so we had a few writers out of University of Mumbai So we got in touch with them. They and some of our writers who actually volunteered by filling a form on the website, and then we connected the orphanage with about 20-25 prospects who were interested in teaching those children. They screened out of those 20-25 prospects. They selected 2-3 candidates out of it, and they just started teaching those children. So that was the kind of on-ground impact as well that we were creating with Rise for India. And then the idea was to scale this thing up and make that change happen, not just in metro cities, but out of every villages, everywhere possible where our readers are situated. So give everybody a chance to create a change in the society.
Right. Interesting. The funny thing is, right now, I recently read a research report on NGOs. If my memory serves me right, we now have one NGO for every 40 Indians.
So again, you have a lot of other research papers with that. Most of the NGOs,
and these are registered NGOs, not even unregistered. If we take unregistered NGOs into consideration, I think the number is perhaps going to be even higher.
But Krishna, there are really, obviously there could be one NGO for every 40 Indians or so, but the number of NGOs are really working for people out there. That number is still very less. Most of these NGOs, I personally, we used to screen NGOs working with them, and most of the NGOs were more interested in being live for 5 years and then get the government grants and things like those. Literally, very few NGOs that we talked out with were interested in creating the kind of change that we wanted to do in the country.
I after I read that and looking at the kind of that is why I was so interested in getting the Better India, because they are bringing a different approach, which you mentioned in the pre-session prep. There is enough negative out there. And then I know as soon as we step out of our homes, there seems to be enough that is wrong with our country. But there is a decent amount that is right as well. But till the day we are not hacking away at these prejudices, because in some sense, in my opinion, India today is poor by choice, not by compulsion, right? And in Hindi, like we say, dane agar चावल बना है कि नहीं, पूरा चावल खाने की जरूरत नहीं है, just pick up a couple of grains, right? So if you just take the NGO example as a microcosm of what it represents, the fact that there is an NGO for every 40 Indians represents that India has, the West itself doesn't enjoy these number of NGOs, right? That indicates the level of civil awareness and the awareness of the instruments with which change can happen. Whether that is being employed negatively or positively, it's a different matter. So when this degree of awareness exists, it only means one thing, that if we haven't progressed, that means we've chosen not to progress, or maybe we've just imposed a set of restrictions, right? So anyway, that I could go on and on. I feel we have everywhere we see, we always keep saying, okay, India has so much potential, that person has so much potential. The potential seems to be this much, and then we seem to be here.
Yes, until unless that potential energy is converted to kinetic energy, really there's no use talking about it.
I know. You just stole the words from my mouth. I keep using the exact same phrase, from my 6th standard physics class. So awesome. So then, what prompted you to? Was it a change of heart that you kind of sold Rise, or what is it that sort of made you exit that?
So basically, this partner NGO that we had since the very start. So I wanted to do something new. We wanted to put, so Rise for India had hit a scale. We were working, in all the metro cities. We had a good set of volunteers. And I believe that somebody who is, so as I said, the idea with Rise for India was to create more on-ground changes. So we wanted someone to come on board who is, active more on the ground, is actually creating some change out there in the villages. And as I mentioned, we want to take this to different villages. We were already out there in the metro cities, and we had a good volunteer base in all the places. So this NGO that we were working with, it was Shiv Prabha Charitable Trust, and it's a quite popular NGO in Maharashtra, and they work in all the villages of the Maharashtra. So the idea was that if this NGO comes on board, they take it up, that they take this project up that we have envisioned, they could just scale it up into the villages, the kind of expertise that we didn't have at that point of time, being just college students. So that's why we decided, upon discussing with that NGO and seeing what they could do with it, we decided to give it to them, and they have been doing some really interesting stuff. So Rise for India is now out there in all the Maharashtrian villages, covering the stories of farmers there. So there have been a lot of suicide farmers in those villages. So those people are actually using Rise for India to change the life of those farmers in the villages of Maharashtra. So that's something that we were unable to do at that point of time, but we really wanted to do. So that's when we decided to delegate this to them.
Interesting. And was there a gap between Rise for India and HiApe, or was it back to back? Did you end up starting HiApe almost immediately after?
So it was almost immediately. So I mean, in fact, for some time, we continued with Rise for India also while there was a transitioning process with Shiv Prabha Charitable Trust. So there was a kind of overlap of about 6 months at that time, but it was almost immediate. Yeah.
Okay. And childhood friends, what was, were you all both from the same town, same locality, classmates, schoolmates?
So yeah, so we did our 11th and 12th together. So we were school friends. So we were preparing for IIT, JEE, and that kind of formed some bond between all the students. So yeah, that bond still continues.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So how was the start for HiApe? You are not the first experienced discovery startup. There have been several. So what was that thought process like? I'm always fascinated in, I'll tell you, I'll give you some background to my question. In 2014, I launched a startup called MADS, which was basically an acronym name for Malls and Deals Around You.
Okay.
What I discovered was in 2013-14 and maybe the first half of 2015 was where the online frenzy sort of hit a crescendo, right? I still remember meeting one of the heads of Shopper Stop Bangalore, one of the locations, and that person in fact told me, "Sir, I'm very scared." I said, "Why are you scared?" "I'm wondering if offline will ever exist." I said, there is a movie called Demolition Man. It was, I think, released somewhere in 1994, mid-90s. And I give this example to a lot of people. Sandra Bullock, Sylvester Stallone is from the past, and Sandra Bullock is from the future in that movie.
Okay.
Right? So Sylvester Stallone has been frozen, and he goes out into the future, and obviously he wakes up with this old memory, right? And they both get attracted to each other. There is a scene where they both get turned on, and they said, we should make love now. And so Sylvester Stallone is seated like 15 feet away from her, and Sandra Bullock is seated. So they both stay seated. So Sandra Bullock tells him, "Okay, let's do this. Let's make love." So Sylvester Stallone is expecting that they both will get undressed and then do that stuff, but she tells him sit there, and then she sits in at her place, and both of them put on a headset.
Okay.
And then, she does the moaning and all of that stuff. And 15 minutes later, she says it's over. And Stallone is wondering what the hell just happened.
Okay. I'm going to add that movie to my watch list.
So I told this person, no matter how popular online is here to stay, it's a credible business model. But no matter how popular it gets, online cannot replace offline. There are some aspects of offline online will replace, and there are some aspects of online that offline can replace, but they're mutually complementary. They're not mutually exclusive, I told him. And then at that point in time, our focus was everybody's talking about online, but there is a rich world offline. So let's help people discover deals and offers in those places, right? And that was our hypothesis. Every other deals platform back then was doing one hack. They would take deals and offers and cashback associated with credit cards and package it in their own way and then start providing offers, right? So nobody was doing really driving footfalls. Nobody was doing any service to the offline merchants, in spite of the fact that there are hundreds of millions of them. So our focus was offline only, and we will also bring offline online. A lot of others started copying some aspects of our model, and then we made some mistakes. We scaled to 9 cities very, very quickly. We had upwards of 50,000 merchants, but then we made some mistakes of moving into commerce, as a bootstrap startup, and commerce is a big capital move in India. So that was our hypothesis. That is how we were different. They were deal startups, but if somebody asked us who you are, that was our hypothesis. What was your hypothesis? What was the background for HighApe?
Yeah. So Krishna, I mean, if you have been following the event startup scene in India, so I mean, there are a lot of startups that have come up over the past few years. I mean, and if I am to say that way, the events place is in fact a graveyard for startups by that sense, because events, I mean, to be very frank, events is still in a very nascent stage in India compared to the Western economies. So what we did different was what helped us survive for the past 5 years, while any other events, I mean, the kind of events that we list on a platform, any other startup for that matter, hasn't been able to do for more than a couple of years. And the reason behind that is the kind of revenue streams and the kind of growth hacks that we have implemented, the kind of tools that we have built for our supply partners. So, I mean, I'll just tell you about how we started HighApe and what are the things that we did different. So, basically, what helped us scale HighApe. So, when we started out, I mean, we were a marketplace. Right? HighApe is an experience marketplace for people where we have a supply side who come and list their events on the platform. And then we have consumers who come and book for those events and go there and have a nice time. So when we started off, we were just starting off with parties. I mean, we were just out of college, and the club parties really looked very interesting to us. I mean, all the fancy people were going there. So it was really interesting for us to be a part of that kind of atmosphere. So, but the problem was the chicken and egg problem that every marketplace faces. I mean, how are we going to get consumers? How are we going to get the supply side? Obviously, we are not the creators, the event creators are not going to come onto the platform if we don't have consumers. The consumers aren't going to come if we don't have to show have anything to show to them, right? So to solve this problem, we became the supply side ourselves. So we became the event organizers in initial days. We partnered up with clubs like Indigo XP. Indigo XP in Koramangala in Bangalore was our first flight. Then there were a few other clubs like Big Picture and the Opus Club. So there were a few places that we tied up with. We started organizing events every Friday or Saturday at these places. So we solved the supply problem for our website. We had something to show to the consumers. And that's when we started, sending out WhatsApp broadcasts to our list, run some social media ads, and then get consumers for our events. When that started to happen, so we had a lot of people coming on to the HighApe website, different creators, different clubs started listing their events on the platform in the hope that they are going to get customers for their events. So that's how the marketplace platform really picked up. And as I mentioned, Prasun had been to the European market and he was telling that there were a lot of interesting things happening there, things that maybe don't happen in the country. So what we did was we started doing a lot of theme parties in Bangalore. And that was the first thing. Before we started doing that, nobody had actually done theme parties in India. So we were, for the greater part of 2016, we were event organizers, and we were in a way educating the market, the kind of events, the potential of the kind of events they could organize. So that we were converting potential energy into kinetic energy from our previous conversation. So we did this Friends theme event, we did Harry Potter theme event, and it kind of took off. It was everywhere on social media. Even Hindustan Times covered that there are two youngsters out there in Bangalore and they're changing the complete party landscape. So they wrote a long article about the things we were doing. And when different clubs saw that the kind of customers we could bring into events, they started listing their events with us, and that's how the marketplace platform really picked up. So after that, once we had the marketplace thing going on, then there was another thing that was happening in the industry at that time. There were different promoters. So that's how it is. I mean, that's how I believe a product has to be built, right? In an iterative approach. So we believe that we are completely uneducated in the field. We don't know anything about it, and we're just rolling with the punches. We didn't have any massive idea that this is what we are going to. We had a brief idea that we are going to build an experience discovery marketplace, the kind that people have never seen before. Now, what happened with the startups that died out? They just built a product firsthand. They just built a discovery marketplace. They launched it up expecting consumers to come onto the platform. We didn't do that. We were building the product in an iterative way according to the demands of our supply side and what our consumers wanted. So once we had the marketplace thing picking up, then we found out we wanted to build a revenue stream. Really, we didn't just wanted to go out into the market to raise funding as the other traditional events started. We wanted to reach some scale on our own first. So we figured out there was something called as promoters in the industry. If you're aware of the events industry, there are a few people called as promoters. What these promoters do is they work with different nightclubs and they bring in customers to these places. So we said, why not we become promoters ourselves? Let's try that out. I mean, obviously it doesn't fit with our scalability model, but we can always figure that out later. At least we'll have some revenue stream for us right now. So we went out, we became promoters, and we were paid about 100 to 150 rupees per guest that we were bringing at the event. So it was a win-win design for all the parties. The consumer were getting certain deals from us for going to a particular venue, typically being a free entry before a certain time limit. The clubs were getting a certain seeding crowd for their venue, and we were obviously getting money out of it for bringing the customers. So that's how it happened. We started doing the promoting thing, and we started providing customers to different venues. And now came the scalability challenge. Obviously, we couldn't scale this model to, let's say, 100 nightclubs in a night or 1,000 events in a day, because we had to be present at these places to see what is the number of customers coming from Hive. And so obviously, first we figured out the revenue stream, and then we decided to find how we are going to scale this model. So we came up with something called as promotion packages. And it just works like the way Facebook marketing works. If you have used Facebook advertising, when you're running an ad on Facebook, so you don't, Facebook doesn't say that I'm going to sell 100 tickets for you or I'm going to send 100 customers to your event. Facebook doesn't say that. What Facebook does is that depending on your objective, let's say it's impressions, we are going to show your ad to a certain number of people. Depending upon the bidding model, your ad may be viewed by 1,000 people or 2,000 people or 10,000 people, whatever that number is. So that's how we introduced promotion package. We started saying to the clubs that we can no longer stand there and charge you per guest. Instead, you can buy the promotion package from us. We'll show your ad to a certain number of people on the Hive banners, on the Hive Android app, iOS app, any places. And so certain impressions will be guaranteed for your event. And out of that, some people will come for your event. So that's how it started. So we were iteratively building the product depending upon the supply demands. We were finding out the things that were going on in the industry, building revenue models out of it as we were going along. And that's how we were building the platform. I believe no other platform for that matter has done it this way, the way Hive has done, building the product iteratively according to the demands of the market.
Very interesting. What sort of, the initial part where you were focused on the clubs until you became promoters, was there a revenue stream involved at that point in time as well, or no?
Yes. So obviously there has been a revenue stream attached with Hive since the day we started. The first day we started Hive, we had revenue out of it. So I remember the first event that we did was the Halloween of 2015. So as I mentioned, we became supply side ourselves. What that means was we were event organizers ourselves. And as event organizers, we used to charge customers for attending the event. The ticket prices used to range from $200 to about 1,000 or 2,000, whatever the kind of event may be. So we had a revenue stream attached with it at that time also.
I see. What sort of scale have you achieved?
So the scale journey has been really fantastic for us. I mean, obviously, when we started, so December is the peak time for events. I mean, if you're in Bangalore, obviously, you will start seeing a lot of different things happening as the December month comes. Obviously, due to COVID, this December might not be like the past December, but still, you will start seeing all sorts of event boardings and digital ads everywhere you lay your eyes on. So during the 2015 December, we sold just 4 tickets, and we were really happy about it. Yeah, that at least somebody has paid on the website, done online payment, and has bought certain tickets from us. Then in the 2016 December, we had about 50,000 visitors, and we sold about 1,000 tickets that year. So, and in the 2019 December, if I have to give you a brief how things went, so we had millions of viewers on the website, about 3 million viewers who came and saw different events. And I don't remember the exact ticket count, but it was the number of tickets sold was also about 50,000 to 60,000 plus, just for single night of December 31st. So that's the kind of scale that we have achieved, and it's really been fantastic. Yeah.
So, any other numbers about scale, the users, the businesses, the cities covered, that sort of stuff that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I mean, we raised our first round of funding in 2017 November, and after that, we have been scaling our operations to multiple cities. Predominantly, we have been active in Bangalore, but we have pretty strong operations in Hyderabad and Pune too. Apart from that, we have been scaling our operation parallelly in Mumbai and Goa.
Okay, and how many events, how many exhibitors, promoters, how many venues, how many users?
Yeah. So we have about, we are really, we do boast about our supply side, and I believe it would be strongest in the industry if we have to compare with any competitor. So we have more than 10,000 plus active organizers who use our platform on a regular basis. So we have a complete DIY platform for them. They could use our SaaS tool to create events on their own, track bookings in real time, and scan the tickets of the customers. So we have 10,000 plus different event organizers and artists doing that for their events. And then apart from that, so this is on the supply side front. We had a number of events. So before Corona, we were listing more than 400 events for every week on our platform. So that comprised of different. So basically, when I was talking about parties, those were the initial days back in 2016. Since 2018, we have been venturing out into different offerings. So we now provide different sorts of experiences like dance classes or a trekking experience. Or if you're in Bangalore, you can also you can fly a plane on your own using Hive. It happens in Yelahanka. You can buy the ticket, go with your loved one, and then just take a pilot training session, and you can fly a plane over the Bangalore air for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So that's the kind of all different sorts of experiences that we have been listing on Hive ever since, and we list about 400 different experiences on our platform pre-corona. Right now, obviously, for physical experiences, the numbers are a little less, but they are more than compensated with the kind of online experiences that we now have to offer our consumers.
We'll come to the online experiences. So, would it be fair to say upwards of 500,000 user base?
Yes.
Close to 1 million?
Yeah, it's during December, as I mentioned, we go around 3 million users in all the different cities.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. So talk to us about the initial days. It's obviously fascinating. Everybody remembers, their first everything, first love, first song, first movie, first car. So the first 4 tickets that were bought on the platform are always special, and especially if they come from strangers, right? Mm-hmm. So you put up a product and somebody actually believed you. It's some sort of a vote of confidence.
Right.
Your product, right? Talk to us about those initial days.
Yeah. So first I'll talk to you about what's the kind of hardship we had in selling those 4 tickets. So we ran a Facebook ad, and that's how we were able to sell off those 4 tickets. And it was interesting. At that time, what was there was that a club wasn't ready to accept our online tickets. So we had physical tickets issued to us from different hotels and clubs, that if a ticket gets sold, we need to go and deliver those tickets to our customers, and then the customer has to show that ticket at counter. So when the tickets got sold, obviously, 4 tickets were sold, it was 2 plus 2. So basically there were 2 bookings, and my co-founder used to take out his bike, and then he went to deliver those tickets at the home of the customer. So that's how it happened during that year. But it was a great experience. I can't describe the happiness. Obviously, selling the happiness of selling that 4 tickets. That was the highest at that point of time. I don't believe after selling any ticket, I had been that happier as I was at that point of time. So during initial days, I mean, the hardship just, it was at every, I mean, as I mentioned, we were organizing events. So we used to go at all these venues. We used to do decor on our own. I mean, I remember during Halloween, we used to take up spray paint, spray the bandages with red colors, and decorate the entire venue on our own. So that's how we started when we were promoters. So we used to go out, take a list out, and me and my co-founder, we used to go and stand at different venues, and we used to take the names of the customers on our own when they were coming at the venues. So obviously, that's how we have been able to build this platform. We were there talking with the customers. We were seeing things firsthand. So once a customer was inside the parties, we used to go out, interact with them, the kind of expectation that they have with the party, with the booking system. So we were really, when I say we were building it iteratively, I really mean that. I mean, we were out there in the market, we were talking with organizers firsthand, we were discussing things with the customers, we were having a look at them while they were having fun. So that's how it was in those days.
Interesting. So, and then what were some of the growth hacks or some of the inflection points that put you on the scale journey?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I mean, one of the growth hacks that we have been able to implement, I believe promotion package was one of them, which I have told to you right now. So let's say, I mean, for that matter, a BookMyShow-like company or a Paytm-like company, they also list events, right? But when a company like BookMyShow would spend millions of rupees or $1 million in promoting their events, so basically that's where the huge cash burn goes, we haven't, till date, we at HighApe haven't spent a single penny of ours in our marketing promotion. And still HighApe is the brand out there amongst the youngsters for the co-out experience. So how we have been able to do that is via promotion packages. So it's the organizers who bear the cost of promoting their events. And when we are doing that promotion, that's how the HighApe brand gets promoted as well. So till date, we haven't had to spend a single penny for marketing. So that's one of the things. Apart from that, as I mentioned, there are a lot of promoters out there in this industry, right? I mean, and we wanted to scale that thing up. I mean, obviously, let's say if a city has 500 promoters, why not give every college student or every person working in IT sector a chance to earn money via HighApe? They could also become promoters. Let's say if you have a group of 10 friends, Krishna, you can partner up with HighApe and we'll give you a promoter link for an event that you're interested in. And you can forward those to your friends to make the booking if they have to go someplace, and you will get a commission out of that booking. So that's how anybody could become a promoter and earn money via HighApe. And in return, what we got was a higher reach among your friend circles, the friend circle of these promoters. Let's say if it's a college ambassador, obviously the HighApe brand would get popular in the entire college at that time. So that's another growth hack that we have implemented, giving promoters the power to earn money via HighApe from their friend circle. Then the third is something that is called as exclusive ticketing. So in the 2019 of December, in Bangalore, we partnered up with all the premium properties of Taj exclusively. So Taj Yeshwanthpur, Taj MG Road, Taj Whitefield, or Airport for that matter, to the VR Mall. So there were different properties that we exclusively tied up with. What that means is that we were controlling the ticketing of that platform, the marketing of ticketing of that event, and the marketing of that event, and we were the ones deciding how the event is going to be. So if a customer has to book ticket in some way or the other, they have to go via HighApe. And because these are the premium properties, obviously they are going to be completely sold out. So that's one of the growth hacks that we have implemented over the past few years.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Was there a vulnerable? What were some vulnerable points along the journey where you thought, hey, we've started, we are doing good? At any point in time, did you feel vulnerable? Did you feel stuck? Did you feel that this was not working out?
So there are a lot of instances. I mean, obviously, Krishna, I mean, the most recent instance being the COVID-19. I mean, it's more than human beings, I suppose it has affected the travel and events industry. So they are in a complete collapse at this point of time. So I'll come to it, how we have tackled that challenge. But before that, obviously, I mean, so this kind of vulnerability, I mean, for entrepreneurs, I mean, it's a journey. So I recently wrote a post on LinkedIn. Okay, so I compared the analogy of cycling. So I'm a cyclist myself. I go for long distance cycling from time to time. So I compared that how cycling is very much similar to entrepreneurship. When you're cycling on the road, so when a slope comes up, right? I mean, when a slope comes and you feel like, I mean, let's say after 10 kilometers, when a slope comes up, you feel like I'm just going to give up. I can't cycle any further. But it's your energy and your motivation, basically the mindset. I believe more than the body, it's the mindset that matters at that time. If you could just go through that slope, if you could just cycle, use your energy and go up to that slope, then there's a slope waiting and slope down waiting for you right there. And you can just zip through flatlands and slopes after that. But you have to drive that cycle with your energy when you face such a uphill in front of you. So that's how and then obviously the next uphill will be right around the corner. I mean, if a slope has come up, a flatland has come up, you just can't expect to zip through at all times. And uphill is going to come up at any point of time. So that's how entrepreneurship is, right? I mean, if a challenge comes up, you need to drive yourself. You need to keep that perseverance and patience to tackle that challenge, to fight it and come out as a winner. And once you do that, once you're able to overcome a challenge, obviously there will be a fun time of user growth, investments, and everything waiting for you after that. But soon you will have another challenge, maybe an expansion challenge or something waiting for you right around the corner. So we have also faced it at all points of time. I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, when we were working as promoters, so we thought that this is the end. I mean, obviously, we can't scale this business up. I think we have to do it. I mean, that just end properly. Let's say, even if we hired people to do it, if we had created 12 people team, they can do just 12 events in a night. And there we were thinking about doing a 10,000, 100,000 events in a day. So how is that possible? I mean, we just can't do it. So that was our first thought process. And obviously, we think through it. I mean, we discussed a lot, we brainstormed about it, and that's when, taking the inspiration from Facebook ads, we came up with this promotion package thing. So it happens at all points of time. I mean, it has happened. There were a lot of, when we started off, there were a lot of denial of deals just because Hive wasn't a popular brand. So those sort of challenges were just tackled by a brute force. I mean, we used to go up, haggle our minds up with the venue managers or the venue owners and make them accept the higher booking. So we have faced this challenge. I mean, obviously during the initial couple of years, these challenges were more intense, and now more recently the challenges have been about more related to scale and expansion into different cities, but there have been challenges at all points of time.
So any particular near-death moment you've had till now in your startup other than COVID?
Other than COVID, I believe the near death. So, I mean, before we raised a round of funding, so every month was a near death for us. So, I mean, what happened, we were completely bootstrapped at that time, and we were just active in Bangalore. And obviously, the scale wasn't that much as it is today. So, at that point of time, it was like we had a team of about, we were 6 people, 2 co-founders and 4 employees. So every month end, we just felt like we can't pay their salaries now. I mean, it was, every month was like that. So, but we have been blessed to have really great people working with us in our journey. I mean, employees have been really great. I mean, the kind of culture that we have at our company, it's just like an extended family. I mean, obviously, our first employee, which we hired back in 2016, is still with us. And so, I mean, during this Corona time also, our employees have been really great in helping us out. So obviously, there was a near-death moment every month before we raised our first round of funding, but because of the great employees that we have had and because of our revenue models that we were able to establish, we just figured out something to earn revenue and pay off the salaries for our employees and the fixed cost, which was basically just the tech cost at that time.
So in the funding round, a couple of questions on the funding. One is obviously how much funding did you raise? Was it Series A or a seed or angel? That's one.
So yeah. Any other question? Yeah. So we call this as pre-Series A round of funding. So because we believe we were much ahead of the seed stage, the idea stage already. So we call the funding round as the pre-Series A round. And we raised funding from 7 different investors. So there were angels. And the amount that we raised is just undisclosed. So we haven't disclosed it.
I see. So what was the, obviously making payroll and paying operational expenditure, this is sort of an existential problem that every startup has.
Yes.
But at that point in time, what was the state of mind? We said, okay, this is what we set out to do. this is what we have accomplished. This is what we are unable to do because we don't have funding, or this is what we are going to be able to do because we have funding. So walk us through that thought process. What was that like?
So obviously, we wanted to, we were able to test the idea in Bangalore at that time with the MVP that we had. Obviously, we worked a lot on the product after we raised our first round of funding, and we had a tech team of about 6-7 people. So before that, we had tested our idea in Bangalore with our MVP. We had quite a good consumer base and organizer base. But we wanted to expand to different cities. We wanted to expand our operations and check out if the model was replicable in other cities as well. Like we were able to do it in Bangalore. So to do that, we needed funding. So what that meant was there is always a cash burn associated in the initial days. We didn't expect ourselves to go again and organize events in Hyderabad or Pune. So obviously, for the first initial months, there was going to be a certain amount of cash burn. And to compensate that, we had to raise a round of funding, after which we did start expanding into it.
Are you profitable right now, or are you still burning through?
So during pre-corona, since the mid of 2019 till Feb of 2020, we were profitable at a unit economics level. So, but obviously Corona has changed things a bit, but we are again stepping back to profit.
So I was intrigued by this online experiences that you mentioned. Yeah. So how has COVID-19 or Corona impacted you? Obviously, it has impacted anything that has a physical connotation associated with it. How has that changed that industry, and how have you responded, and what changes are you seeing?
Yeah. So Krishna, our tagline was that Hiep. If we have to describe Hiep in as few words as possible, we would say that Hiep is a go out app. So that's what Hiep was. If you have to go out and have some fun, that's when Hiep comes into the picture. You can just open the app and find all sorts of go out activities and events and parties on your application. So, and as Corona came, people stopped going out. So that's what happened with Hiep, and so we did take a very big hit. And it happened during March. So when people when all sorts of curfews and everything were being imposed. So, and March is a pretty big time for events. It's the holy season and we get a lot of bookings at that time. So it was really disheartening for us to see such a thing happening. And but obviously, the April month was very difficult. But from May onwards, we did roll up our sleeves and we started working on what would be the next pivot, or let's say a next addition onto the platform, which can help us combat this. So that's when we included a new section called as live sessions. We, in a span of next 2 to 3 months, we started listing more than 200 online experiences every week on our platform. These online experiences could be, let's say, a live dance class or a live, we had this harmonium class for people who were interested in classical music. If you're interested in poetry, you can come and learn poetry, how to write poetry onto Hiep. So we had all these sorts of fun, and even on the tech front, if you want to attend a tech workshop, or let's say if you're interested in stock market, or if you're dealing with anxiety and depression, we had specialists coming onto the platform who could take live sessions for you if you were facing that sort of a problem. So those were the kind of online events and experiences that we started listing up, and we rarely scaled the numbers quite fast, and we were able to build some revenues out of it.
Interesting. And if you've read the book The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, Taleb essentially says and he bases it on his experience as a Wall Street trader, and where the memory of the Wall Street trader is possibly limited to the last 3-4 years, or maybe 7-8 years, right? Okay. And in the trading world, there is something called as the Black Friday of 1987 in Ronald Reagan's, first or second term, where the US was the dominant economy of the world. The only economy that had mounted some sort of a challenge was Japan. And Japan, purely with electronic and automotive exports to the US, had emerged as a developed economy. in spite of no real indicators pointing to falling economic parameters, there was a crash. And then eventually there is a lot of rationalization about why the crash happened and then stuff like that. So Taleb has written this fascinating book called The Black Swan. Essentially, his whole theory is until people went to Australia and down under, they discovered the black swan. Everybody thought that a swan is white. Right?
Okay.
So life is like that. There is going to be an event that is going to be unexpected, and therefore that is going to create a black swan. And going to disrupt life as we know it. I think in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen demonetization. We have seen the implementation of GST and the coronavirus crisis as well. And the lockdown associated with the coronavirus playing some sort of, I think now it is black swans are becoming more whiter so to speak, in that the disruptions are becoming so often. So and all of them are in this time frame that you've started, right? So 2015 to 2020, in some sense, a lot of events are cash driven. There is a good amount of the cash economy involved in that. What sort of impact did these have, if any? And what sort of trends did you see? And as an entrepreneur, how do you obviously deal with this sort of black swans or existential crisis?
So, I mean, in terms of demonetization, obviously, Krishna, I mean, we were always an online payment platform. So, we didn't face any problem with that. So, events, obviously, what you were saying is correct. I mean, the cash transactions do happen, let's say, at the venue or things like those. But at HighApe, I mean, HighApe was always an online platform. So, we were never a part of it. But talking about trends, so yeah, we have been seeing a certain shift in today's millennials. I mean, let's say today what we have seen is the disposable income has been increasing towards the millennials. Let's say, as a person today, I don't own a car or a house, right? I mean, I like to, if I have some sort of money, I'd like to travel around. I mean, I'll go to some international destination, or even every weekend, I would just go someplace out of Bangalore, or I'll just go on a weekend at a bar or a venue and have a nice time. I mean, and people do spend a lot on this. I mean, in one outing, you're going to spend about 4,000 to 5,000 rupees. Obviously, if you save up that money, you can easily pay off your car loan installment, right? But today's millennials, I mean, they don't want to do that. They want to spend money on experiences, and that's why a business like HighApe has been able to scale their business. I mean, obviously, if someone would have done this about 10 to 15 years ago, it might have not been a great hit, right? I mean, at that point of time, people were more interested in creating FDs, creating RDs, buying houses, buying cars. So there has been a shift over a period of time. So as people say, the economy has been shifting, right? I mean, first it was a goods-based economy where everything was being manufactured, right? People were buying goods, people were buying cars, people were buying, anything that could be manufactured in a factory. And that's when big people like Ford and all, they accumulated their wealth. So then came the service-based economy. I mean, people started shifting their jobs to service sectors. They were providing services and they were taking up services with the money that they had, right? I mean, if you could afford to have a maid at your house, you'll have a maid at your house. A person sitting in US who could afford a BPO working out from India to help him with a tech problem, he will have that service for himself. So the economy shifted to a service-based economy. Now today, there is a transition phase happening. There is a trend where the service economy is shifting to an experience-based economy. So people are really more interested in having such sort of experiences that they can remember for a lifetime. And we at HighApe want to be the front runner for that transition. I mean, when the new age youngsters are adopting that and spending more towards the experiences, we want to be there as a platform where they can come and do it, where they can find all sorts of interesting things that they want to do in their life.
So that's great. So I'll ask you two questions, and then an interesting story that I read online yesterday.
Yeah.
I think a brother and his sibling. I don't know if the siblings a sister or another brother. Their parents left them, I think, a few $1 million in trust fund and then bonds and with recurring income. And then this person said, all I want to do is you set me up, or rather you made me set for life. I'm going to use this money to travel the world. Right? I'm interested in exploring the world. I'm going to see the world. That's really my life goal. I don't want to do anything else. And apparently their parents got angry, turned around, and then said they did not intend their kids to be living off of the wealth that they created, but they wanted their kids to be something, and they forbid him from actually accessing that money as soon as they learned of his actual plan. But that actually validates what you are saying, right? So that there is a lot of, I think the world has gotten a lot more interesting, or rather it has been interesting, but the fact that it's more connected, more aware. Take a simple tool like a live translator, right? So you speak and then the app immediately translates it for you.
Right.
Now that it has created a situation whereby you could go and live in an alien land or a new land, and with the likes of Airbnb, you live amongst the locals and you get to experience a taste of that life. So I'm totally with that.
Yeah, Krishna, I read, sometime back that in America in 1906, an average American was spending about 55% of his income on acquiring food for his survival. And today, an average American is spending about just 5%. So, you see, in the pyramid of evolution, we have come to a point where we no longer have to think about our basic needs. Now, right. What comes above that is experience. You have to enjoy your life, right? You just have about some 90, 100 odd years. You are just a dot on the timeline. So what you can do is you can actually experience your life in the best possible way and create memories that is going to go with you to the grave. So, and that's the whole purpose.
So, but there is some sort of at least contradictory information, at least in the COVID era, that's emerging, that because of the economic disruption that this thing has really caused, a lot of the millennials who didn't own anything, who didn't really invest in anything, are now turning around and then looking at, I think it's early to say, looking at creating assets for themselves. What do you think about that?
So I think, Krishna, if you see every decade or so, there comes the point of time where such financial upheavals happens in the economy, right? During 2008 financial crisis also, a lot of people lost their jobs and everybody thought that, things are not going to improve, or, and it's actually, we were not very far. We started HighApe just 7 years after the 2008 crisis, right? So what happens is, I believe that humans have the ability to reach a balance point very soon. So obviously, in the short term, let's say for 6 months or so, what you are saying might be right. People are afraid at this point of time. Let me give you an example. We thought that we were apprehensive of starting physical experiences very soon, to be very honest. We wanted to just keep exploring the online experiences, believing that people won't go out for physical experiences. But the Dandiya season came, Navratri, a lot of Dandiya events come during that time. We said, okay, let's just give it a chance, see how people are responding. And we're thinking that nothing's going to happen. We're just taking a trial out of it. So, and you'll find it interesting that just a couple of events that we took up for promotion, the promotion package revenue model that I mentioned you earlier. So, and there were about 400, 500 bookings for both of those events. So we did ensure that there were all sorts of safety precautions at the venue, and the venue was large enough to accommodate these many people with social distancing measures. But people were really interested. People wanted to go out. So let's say a percentage of people are still very afraid, and that percentage is going to keep decreasing with time as and when the situation improves. To some extent, let's say people are saying the herd immunity is about to kick in, or the vaccine is just around the corner. So with time, people will resume their normal activities and things will start going back to normal. Right now, until obviously, till certain people are afraid, they will be apprehensive of such things, but that apprehension is only going to go down, and I'm really optimistic about it.
So that's I totally agree with that. In fact, if anything, I think as human beings, what we cherish is our freedom. Anybody that tries hard to suppress that freedom in whatever form or fashion, I think at some point in time is going to face a backlash. While it's not the topic of our discussion, I happen to believe that like we discussed before we hit the record button, I think 6 degrees of separation that we talk about, in my own case, I have seen all the 6 degrees get covered, COVID being in the household. And in some sense, if you see the progression of the virus and the disease itself, I think it's gone from severe to mild and getting milder as it passes through the community. And I don't know about this vaccine business. Now it feels like it's another gigantic fraud. Because the listeners should go ahead and then do their own research. It will indicate different news pieces they should look at. The investments that people are saying that they're making in the interest of humanity, and then what they are saying the government should be prepared to pay when the vaccine comes out completely contradicts their humanitarian values. So I do feel that we are close to normal. If there are any all of this talk about reinfection, all of that, I think is valid. There after all of the insanity that kicked in, and some of it rightfully so, right? But I think it's some amount of normalcy should return now,
right?
Because no matter what you are, how evolved an economy you are, right, there are going to be sections of the population that are going to be vulnerable. Like I said in the beginning, we are a country that's poor by choice. I look at the last 5 years and say the number of income disruption events. We are perhaps the only country on the planet that is so arrogant about not having an income. We very rarely talk about the world revolves around money, and as they say, dhanamulam idam jagat, that's what they say in Sanskrit. But we have this mindset saying that, we do not need to worry about income, right? And then, but I think that's so sort of wrong. But when we come to platforms like yours, the upheavals that you have seen, right? I remember in 2018, we used to organize certain events as part of a fashion portal because independent brands had become so popular. This was 2017, and then demonetization and GST literally wrecked a lot of that stuff. And Bangalore, the kind of disruption that has come about because infrastructure is the new source of corruption, so to speak. Every part of Bangalore being dug up, right? Literally, there are really only tiny islands of Bangalore that have infrastructure intact. Every other part of Bangalore is literally dug up. And that has created some sort of a disruption in the ecosystem. So the wealth creators have become lesser and lesser. So in this scenario, there are obviously the large media houses, right? There is for every media startup that succeeds, it feels like the Times Group is really around the corner, just trying to, waiting to clone that model and really nip that other startup in the bud, right? I mean, that is just a force of competition. It's a force of nature. Nothing right or wrong about it. It's just a feature of it. But let's come to the next evolution of your own model, right? So the initial days are all about establishing. Today, you have achieved some sort of scale, right? But the real scale is only going to come when people see that HighApe is the platform that enables them to do dominant things. Just like, for example, platforms like TikTok provided influencers to scale their audiences to, maybe millions and lakhs of viewers and then derive a revenue stream out of it. Which means you have to think about a dynamic shift in your own business model, right? So the asset-light model that a lot of marketplaces embrace, it works in different economies up to a point in time, right? After that, you need to get different things into play. Where is your evolution? How are you going to In all of this chaos, what is your next evolution?
So, Krishna, I mean, obviously, as startup founders, we also obviously are always thinking about what's the next step would be for our product. I mean, what extra value additions can we give to our consumers? I mean, as I mentioned during the initial days, it was about increasing the number of offerings that we have. I mean, adding more number of events, adding activities, the dance classes, the live sessions, etc., etc. But going ahead, obviously, I mean, one of the things that we were experimenting with, I mean, the Corona did play around with it a little. I mean, we are going to resume back to it, is something called as socially. So let's say, I mean, you are going to an event or a concert, okay? But none of your friends, so let's assume that DJ in the trance genre is coming in Bangalore, right? I mean, you're very interested in trance genre music, but none of your friends really like trance music. So what are you going to do? In a simple scenario, you'll have to drop your plan. So what the socially product in HighApe does is you can go to any event onto the platform. You can find out other people who are going into the event and they might want a companion to go there with. You can chat with them, you can, interact with them, and if your interest match, you both can go together for that event. So that is one thing that we are working on HighApe. I mean, connecting people with like mindsets. So if you must have heard about Meetup, so what you could do on Meetup is that you can go ahead, create an experience, and then people will come there and come and meet with you if they are interested in their experience. So HighApe already is sort of, I mean, Meetup isn't a marketplace, right? I mean, Meetup isn't that sort of a thing. At HighApe, we already have a lot of events and customers are already booking on HighApe. So we thought, I mean, why can't we also allow people to meet with a similar mindset? What I mentioned was about concert. The same can be about trekking. The same can be for cycling. The same can be for any walking tour in the city. I mean, like mindset, let's say, 40 or 50-year-old woman, I mean, if they want to walk in a park, they can just create an event on HighApe about for walking in the park, a 30-minute walk in Indiranagar. So we have cycling events like that, the midnight cycling in Indiranagar. So anybody can come and just create an event like that, an activity where people with similar mindset can also come and chat with them and go for that. So that's the sort of thing. I mean, a complete scale, a housewife, even if she wants to teach people how to play harmonica in her home, she can do that. I mean, she can create an activity on HighApe and people can come in her home, let's say 2 or 3 students, and they can learn harmonica from her. So all sorts of activities, and people can also connect with like-minded persons. That's what we believe the next evolution for HighApe will be like.
Events with strangers. Or like
events with strangers, and anybody can be an event creator. I mean, you need not be a professional for that.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So, what is your one unique piece of insight that you would like to share with other founders?
So my insight is, I mean, obviously, building this startup, I believe that skills and knowledge is really, I mean, quite overvalued in the industry. I mean, I believe the most important thing that one needs to have, I'd say a couple of things, is being curious and being patient, having perseverance. So how that helps is, I mean, in today's age, knowledge is accessible to all, right? I mean, if you're just passing out from, let's say, even a Harvard University, apart from the peer group that you have had, there is no knowledge you would have gained that nobody else can access in the world. Everybody can access that knowledge. So what matters is that how curious you are and what your rate of learning is. I mean, how fast can you learn things? Then a person without even a college degree can outsmart a person coming out from a Tier 1 college. That's what I believe. And the second thing is, now you have that knowledge, you can learn things, but do you have the patience to apply that knowledge, to build things out of it? So I've met a lot of my friends or a lot of people I know, they have wanted to start up, okay? And they believe the biggest hardship in starting up is thinking of an idea. So they would just keep thinking about it, and then they would be like, I'll start it. And just a month down into starting that business, they will just shut the idea. Why? Because they face a few challenges, right? An idea is nothing until executed properly. And when you are executing, thinking of an idea, getting your company registered or creating a first landing page of the website or find a domain name, those are the easiest steps. Anybody can do that. what you need to understand is that hardships start at that point and challenges will come. You can't expect the things to roll out smoothly like that. You're not in a job anymore. You are riding a bicycle. You have to expect the uphills coming up for you, right? And it's your energy, your motivation. You have to keep yourself motivated to overcome that. And perseverance is going to help you with that. So you need to be confident. You need to be optimistic about overcoming those hurdles. And that's how you build your style.
What is your personal leadership style?
My personally, I'm a completely chilled out person. I like to delegate tasks as much as possible. So if I'm working with anyone, I believe them to be sincere and responsible enough to take on responsibilities. And as a leader, I will give them complete room, complete space to execute the things the way they want. I like to work in that sort of environment. I have been that kind of a person, right? I've done since my childhood. I've done things that I have wanted to do. So I expect that when a person is working with me, if I'm the leader, I want to give the same kind of space to people working.
Do you read?
I do. I like to read. I used to read a lot of self-help books, but then I realized that most of the self-help books write the same things, just in a twisted language. So after that, I read a lot of startup books as well. So one book that I especially like, which helped us in creating HighApe was Book. So if you remember, it's the yellow cover book. They tell you about different habit loop of a customer, how you can make a person hooked up.
Nir Eyal.
I don't remember the writer's name. Yeah, it was about 3 years ago.
Yeah,
so
Hook.
Yeah, Hook.
It's a terrific book.
Yeah, it's really a great book. So I really loved reading that. And one of the other books that I remember was Freakonomics. So the way the numbers can change. The numbers remain consistent, right? And I've seen that. In fact, at HighApe too, if you see the amount of conversion that we see for every event, some way or the other, it remains to be constant. If an event is happening at Indigo XP, obviously 1,000 different people are going to see the event every time, but let's say the conversion percentage is always going to be 10%. Numbers are really fascinating that way. So and since then I have believed the power of data. So, and we have utilized that in HighApe as well to create a different offerings for a supply side and to ensure a stable stream of revenue from that using those numbers.
I think what this kind of stuff, what they talk about in Freakonomics and what Nir Eyal talks about in Hooked, I think are two things, right? The fundamental laws of nature, in some sense, as it applies to humans, not the way physics works, and the way human psychology works, right? So data is a representation of how the world works. So, for example, when you see a normal distribution curve, if there are 100 students in a class, there's some set here, there is some set here, and there is a bulge in the middle. That's the normal distribution curve, right? Now, the beauty is, I think the most smartest entrepreneurs in the world are either by design or by accident, or because innately somehow they have come to understand some of these workings, have leveraged these two.
Right.
So they've leveraged human psychology, and the other version, maybe a more simpler word for that is human emotion. And then the other word, the other law is the laws of nature. So for instance, if you in sales, for example, when you're doing sales, there is something called as a numbers game. There is a funnel. These are all concepts. If you profile somebody, if you put in X, just go through the numbers, you will get Y. Obviously, and then there is another thing that says if you torture the data long enough, it will confess, right? So I think the smartest entrepreneurs are the ones that piece these things together and somehow intuitively and still simplify all of this and say, how can I make somebody's life meaningful out of it? And the ones that scale massively are the ones who've done it with something very simple and maybe one or two aspects of it. Right? So very rightly put, I think beautiful that those two books should be on top of your mind. Any other book that comes to your mind?
Any other books? So, in terms of self-help books, as I mentioned, I remember two right now that comes to my mind that I found fascinating. Tuesdays with Mori and The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. So, these are the two books that I can remember right now. And apart from that, I like to remember. I like to read different other kinds of books. I mean, now since then I have stopped reading startup books and this self-help books, and these days I'm more reading academic books sort of thing. So right now I'm reading a book of Ayurveda's take on mind psychology. So what Ayurveda has to say about that. So basically they divide the mind into sattvic mind, rajas mind, and tamas mind. So it's interesting. I like to read about different things and see if I can get some sort of interesting idea from something which I can. So when you actually, let's say if you are hiring for an industry, let's say if you are hiring someone for hire, right? If you take someone from the events field only, they will just have a viewpoint for how things are done in the events field. They can't bring some new ideas on the plate. And
Right.
having worked, let's say if I just keep reading, I figured this out. Like if I just keep reading about startups, I just have one particular viewpoint. I mean, I just am thinking from a product angle. So that's when I just started reading about books about economics. So I am reading Principles of Economics too right now, which is an academic book taught in undergraduate of economics. I am reading the Ayurveda's take on mind psychology. I don't know. I mean, somewhere the last book I remember reading was Sapient. So, and interestingly enough, some way or the other, I do get some ideas out of these cases, and they are very something different that I couldn't have got from a startup book or from a self-help book kind of thing.
So then I think you'll enjoy reading a book called Range.
Range.
Range. It's by a guy called Rory Susskind.
Okay.
It's a fascinating read. The funny thing is, like what I talked about Malcolm Gladwell Outliers. The whole central concept of Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers is that in order for you to succeed and then at something, you need to put in 10,000 hours. And in many ways, it's a retrofit. He takes the example of Bill Gates and then some of these other people and shows you how they had put in 10,000 hours by the time they saw success. Because he doesn't explain how other people put in 10,000 hours and didn't succeed. So an extension of that concept is used for Tiger Woods. And the world always has fascination with child prodigies. And the story around Tiger Woods is that one day when he was a very young child, I think 4 or 6 years old, in his father's driveway, he did a perfect putt. His father was a golfer himself. And in golfing, the driving, which is the initial longer shot, is relatively considered easier compared to the putting, which is supposed to be more precise, right? So, and Tiger does a perfect putt. And the story goes that at that day, his father knew that Tiger was going to be a genius. So he's in Range. They contrast that story with the story of Roger Federer, who never played tennis until he was an adult, and he never did that 10,000 hour thing, and he never took tennis seriously, so to speak, right? And he's not a prodigy, but he's possibly has had the longest successful streak in all of tennis. So this whole notion, you're right. So every book that you see, for me, I've come to understand this as data that doesn't contradict itself. It just shows that there are millions of routes to success and each human being finds their own.
Right.
So that's how it is.
So Krishna, basically, talking your point on a data perspective. So what I believe in data is that data can't predict on an individual level that whether this person can be, obviously. So, every individual, so if that happens, then nobody has freedom of choice, right? We don't have free will if that happens. So, I believe on an individual level, it's the psychology of that person, and there is no one way to be successful. As you mentioned, Tiger Woods was a child prodigy who from his childhood was playing golf, and Roger Federer started getting his training at a later stage. Similarly, if you see Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are completely different persons. They don't share the same personality traits. So, on that regard, people can be successful in different ways. So,
right.
And obviously,
you're absolutely right. Awesome. This has been a great conversation. In closing, what would be your 2 words of wisdom for potential founders out there?
As I mentioned before, be curious and be perseverant. Keep trying, keep hustling.
Awesome. Aman, thank you for being with us today. We wish that HighApe scales even further and become a dominant platform, not just in India, but across the world. And I'm sure when you scale a new peak, Maharajas of Scale will be there to listen from you and hear from you what that vantage point looks like. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks for this opportunity, Krishna. Nice talking to you.
We hope you enjoyed this story. If this story made a difference to you, tell us by leaving a comment on the website or our social media channels. Help us spread the love by subscribing, liking, and sharing our show. We welcome speaker suggestions and collaboration. Write to me at tanya@maharajasofscale.com.